Cúán and the White Witch. In the twilight of his life, Cúán the Mighty, once the most celebrated warrior in all of Era, after a lifetime of war and slaughter, sought peace in the far-flung reaches of Donegal. His name had echoed across the green hills and misty valleys of Ireland, a name associated with countless victories, powerful foes vanquished, and a legacy rooted in ancient Irish folklore. Yet, even a hero of his caliber could not escape the weariness that comes with a life steeped in bloodshed and glory. Accompanied by his most trusted warriors, Cúán found refuge in a remote village nestled against the vast primeval forest that blanketed the land. At that time, Ireland was still covered in dense woodlands, with bears and wolves lurking in the shadows, true dangers for any who ventured too far from safety. The villagers lived in harmony with nature, felling trees and hunting for food, and they built tall wooden walls to protect themselves from the creatures prowling in the wilds. Cúán and his men joined the villagers, blending into their quiet, hard-working lives. They worked as lumberjacks, felling trees from dawn until dusk, and took up roles as protectors, defending the village from the predatory beasts that roamed just beyond the walls. For a time, it seemed the village was blessed with tranquility under the watchful eye of the legendary hero. But as with all tales of peace, darkness was never far behind. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the village, the shrill sound of a sentry's horn echoed through the forest. Vikings, fierce and ruthless, stormed the village with axes raised, their war cries piercing the stillness. The villagers scrambled to defend themselves, but they were no match for the well-armed invaders. It was then that Cúán, old though he was, rose once more to the occasion. With his double-bladed axe in hand, he led his men into battle. The clash between Irish and Viking steel was fierce, but Cúán's skill had not faded with age. He fought like the legend he was, cutting through the enemy ranks, his axe a blur of lethal precision, letting his bloodlust carry him through another day. By the day's end, the ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, and the Vikings were driven back to the sea. Among the survivors of the Viking raiders was their princess, Astrid, a striking woman with fiery red hair and eyes as cold as the northern winds. In a bid to establish peace between the two peoples and avoid further bloodshed, the elders of the village offered a proposition. Cúán could marry Astrid, binding the Irish and the Norse together in trade and cooperation. Though she was as proud and fierce as any warrior, Astrid knew that her people were in no position to refuse. She accepted the proposal, and soon after, she became Cúán's wife. Life in the village resumed its quiet rhythm, but the marriage between Cúán and Astrid was never truly harmonious. Astrid struggled to integrate into village life. She didn't speak the language, and her foreign customs and fiery temper made her an outsider. The villagers were slow to trust her, and some shunned her entirely, whispering behind her back that she was cursed, a bringer of misfortune. As the years passed, the village began to suffer strange hardships. Crops failed, the weather grew harsher, and the wolves, once kept at bay by the village walls, seemed to draw closer with every passing night. Their eerie howls echoed through the forest, a constant reminder of the lurking danger beyond. The villagers, increasingly desperate, began to murmur that Astrid was to blame. They saw her as a foreigner, an intruder who had brought ill fortune upon them. In their minds, the strange Norse woman was cursed, a witch who spoke to the wolves and communed with dark forces. And it wasn't long before their suspicions turned to action. The village elders, pressed by fearful whispers, decreed that Astrid must be banished. They believed that casting her out into the wilds would lift the curse and bring an end to their suffering. Cúán, torn between his loyalty to his people and his duty to his wife, allowed her to be cast out, though his heart was heavy with regret. Alone in the dark forests of Donegal, Astrid wandered, forsaken by both her husband and her people. But she was not entirely without allies. The old gods of her homeland, the gods of the north, watched over her. She built a small cabin deep in the woods, away from prying eyes, and slowly learned to live off the land. The villagers rarely saw her again, but rumors began to spread of a pale woman who lived alone in the forest, one who had become something otherworldly. They called her the White Witch. They said she spoke to wolves, that she could command the weather, and that she used blood magic to curse those who crossed. Over the years, her legend grew, and the villagers' fear of her only intensified. She was blamed for every failed harvest, every ill-fated hunting trip, every strange sound that came from the woods at night. 10 years passed, and during that time, Cúán remarried. His new wife was a local woman, and together they had two beautiful children. Life seemed to settle once again in the village, though the shadow of the White Witch never fully disappeared. Then, one bitter winter, the wolves grew bolder. Their howls seemed to come from right outside the village walls, and soon the village faced yet another season of hardship. Food grew scarce, and the villagers, already on edge, began to whisper that the White Witch was to blame. Her curse, they said, had never truly been lifted. One dark night, a group of the village's strongest men gathered, armed with torches and weapons. They had decided that the only way to break the curse was to offer the White Witch as a sacrifice to the gods of the forest. Cúán did not join them, for he believed he had already lost his connection to the woman he once called wife. But his absence did not spare Astrid from their wrath. The men found a cabin and surrounded it, their faces grim and determined. When Astrid opened the door, she saw the hatred in their eyes, and she knew that there would be no mercy. She pleaded with them anyway, speaking in her native tongue, begging for her life. She reminded them that she had once been their hero's wife, that she had been cast out unjustly. But her words fell on deaf ears. In the end, they burned her alive. As the flames consumed her, Astrid screamed curses in her strange language, cackling with manic laughter as the fire devoured her flesh. She vowed revenge, swearing that they would all suffer for their cruelty. A week after the burning of Astrid, Cúán's two children vanished. The village was thrown into a panic. The wolves' howls grew louder each night, their voices a chilling chorus just beyond the wooden walls. Search parties were sent into the forest, but day after day, they returned empty-handed. Finally, Cúán himself took up his axe and set off alone into the forest, determined to find his children or die trying. The forest was a different place now, thick with a malevolent presence. Every tree seemed to whisper, every shadow seemed to move. Cúán's grip tightened on his axe as he pressed deeper into the wilds, his heart heavy with dread. He followed the howls to a small clearing where Astrid's cabin stood, eerily untouched by time. Inside, he heard the faint sound of voices, strange, lilting words that he had never learned to understand. His anger flared, and he kicked down the door. Inside the cabin, two wolf pups were chained to the wall. They whimpered and cowered, their eyes wide with fear, but they made no move to attack. Cúán's mind, clouded by grief and fury, saw only one thing: wolves. Wolves who had taken his children. Wolves who had been the bane of his village for years. Without a second thought, he swung his axe, and in one swift motion, ended their lives. The moment their blood stained the floor, a voice rung out in his mind, a voice he hadn't heard in years. It was Astrid, her laughter echoing through his thoughts. A cruel and mocking sound. "You've killed them, Cúán," her voice whispered. "You've killed your own. From this day, I curse your eyes, and I curse your soul." Cúán stumbled from the cabin, dazed and confused. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and as he approached the village, and then he saw it. Wolves everywhere. The wolves had overrun the village he called home. They prowled through the streets, their eyes glowing in the twilight. In his rage, Cúán charged into the village, his axe swinging wildly. One by one, he slaughtered the wolves. They scattered before him, some whimpering, some trying to flee. But he gave them no quarter. He killed them all. Mothers, pups, the old and the young. His axe became slick with blood, and his heart pounded with a savage, righteous fury. When the last wolf lay dead at his feet, Cúán stood in the middle of the village, panting heavily. But something was wrong. The air was too still, the village too silent. He looked down at the bodies scattered around him, and only then did he see the truth. They were not wolves. They were the villagers, his friends, his neighbors, his family. Among the dead lay his wife, her lifeless eyes staring up at him in silent accusation. Astrid's curse had done its work. She had made him see what she wanted him to see, and in his madness, he had killed them all. They say, Cúán still roams the forests of Donegal, haunted by the ghosts of those he loved. He is cursed to wander the wilds, forever hunting the wolves he believes took his family, though none but him can see them. Some nights, when the moon is full and the wolves howl in the distance, you might catch a glimpse of him, an old man with a double-bladed axe, stalking through the trees, his eyes wild with the madness of his eternal hunt. And that is why, if you ever find yourself in the deep forests of Ireland, you should never howl like a wolf, especially at night. For Cúán the Mighty is still out there, hunting, and he may mistake you for one of the wolves he so desperately seeks to kill.